that for over 50 years we left the TV spectrum low utilization because of what was anticipated in the early 50s to be the quality of TV receivers. And they became sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so we should learn from that every 6 TV channel problem that started, honestly, in the 50s with what people thought were the fundamental limits of TV receiver performance, but technology took off, but there was no way to phase in that technology, and nobody had the moral fortitude to do it. But coupled in broadcasting with the fact that once you own a TV station, nobody wants more competition. It wasn't as much a question of interference, but broadcasters did not want more competition. And as a result of that, until DTV came along, and for other reasons they had to solve the problem, did we start using UHF spectrum more than 1 every 6 channels.
But just to wrap up this portion of the interview, given that, is there something that we can do individually or with another organization to potentially move these debates forward to help with spectrum policy? Is there something that, I understand my GPS in my car is going to be fine, and my phone GPS, everything is fine, but there is something to be said to being...
Well, you might have to get a new GPS in 5 years.
Right, but knowing the backbone of the knowledge economy is going to be about getting information quickly and the whole mobility of the culture, is there something that we could be doing, or is it just something to monitor as we go?
I think FCC has to improve the way it deals with these very technical problems. FCC is a lot of things to a lot of people. It deals with broadcasting ownership and content, the wardrobe failure issue, remember that?
Yeah.
It deals with certain telephone rate issues. It deals with net neutrality. The 5 commissioners who are appointed to FCC are not appointed because of their knowledge, interest, and abilities in this type of issue. They're generally appointed, let's be pragmatic, and their predecessors because of their views towards broadcast ownership and content, which for politicians is very important, and also because of their views for rural telephone rates. Because certain senators from the big states in the West, it's very important to hold down rural telephone rates. Those are the dominant issues that affect the appointment of commissioners. It's interesting that no engineer has been appointed a commissioner in 40 years. Most staffers who work for commissioners, each commissioner has 3 staffers. You know, some people say the issue is none of them are card-carrying engineers. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is that the vast majority have not been people with experience and interest in technical policy. I have known lawyers without engineering degrees who were very interested in technical policy issues. The issue is not do you know how to design a radio. The issue is do you know the right questions to ask and the right answers, and understand which answers are BS and which ones aren't. The FCC is understaffed, under-budgeted. My wife worked at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They both had a bigger technical staff in proportion, and they had routinely budgeted monies to the national labs, Livermore, Los Alamos, so when they had a novel technical problem, they could send it out to Los Alamos and Livermore for independent review of complex new technical problems. This is a complex new technical problem. I doubt if there are any people at FCC who've ever really dealt in the quirks of GPS before. And while we've spoken on consumer receivers, there are several classes of receivers, particularly the one that surveyors use called RTK, that have a whole different set of problems, related to different set of problems. And FCC does not have the resources financially to go out and budget for these things. If you listen to the news when FDA approves a new drug, is it FDA? Listen carefully. It's an FDA advisory committee. FDA has a network of advisory committees that's key in these technical policy decisions. FCC, while it sometimes has a technical advisory committee, indeed does at the moment, it disappeared for a couple of years, now it's back, it never gives its technical advisory committee an opportunity to deal on these things like FDA does. NRC also has technical advisory committees. Real technical regulatory agencies have advisory committees which are involved in these technical discussions. Real regulatory agencies, the technical jurisdiction, have money to go to, like FCC did on North Point, to go to MITRE, like NRC goes to Livermore and Los Alamos. They have things to do with that. There are tools. FCC likes to think it's the only regulatory agency in Washington. It does not learn from other regulatory agencies to deal with technical issues. It's also interesting to compare FCC to its counterpart in the UK, Ofcom. And what's interesting to me, Ofcom's a relatively new agency. It's a merger of several agencies 4 or 5 years ago. Ofcom is able to do more than one thing at a time because while its board of directors is similar to the 5 FCC commissioners, bigger but similar, it has an executive director who's able to make decisions on his own, subject, like the president of General Motors is subject to board review, and the head of Ofcom and his 5 main managers are able to do things without clearing each one with the board of directors. So a lot of things get slowed down at FCC because the commissioners are unwilling to delegate authority even on non-controversial issues. This issue needs presidential appointees. A lot of decisions before FCC does not need presidential appointees, and yet things get bogged down because they get involved in all those issues. My friend Mitchell Lazarus, who's a lawyer in Washington in the Wireless Innovation NOI of a year or so ago, outlined 8 clients of his who had non-controversial wireless innovations and took 4 to 6 years to get them approved by FCC. They weren't anywhere near as controversial as this, and I think the problem is that the commission can't deal with non-controversial things because it has inefficient workflow mechanisms. So I think pressing for, is the current structure of the FCC adequate for our time? When the FCC was formed in 1935, the first thing it did at its first meeting, it had 7 commissioners and not 5, was to set up 3 parallel subcommittees. Little known fact, go to the library, look up the minutes of the first FCC meeting. FCC was descended from the Interstate Commerce Commission in part. That's the way the ICC had done things. There were 3 committees, I believe they were telephone, telegraph, and radio. They could do things in parallel. The Administrative Procedures Act had not been passed, so it was a lot simpler to make decisions. Since then, the industry has become bigger, it's become more complex, and the Administrative Procedure Act makes decision-making much more time-consuming. I think the FCC has less decision-making capacity now than it had in 1935. And if it continues to deal with things like it did in 1935, there may be a growing disparity between its workload and the workload before. When the country was formed, the Constitution says we shall have courts and a Supreme Court. Okay. We did not have a Court of Appeals till the mid-19th century because the country was simple enough that there were district courts and they were appealed to the Supreme Court. At some point in the 19th century, they said, this country is getting too complicated. We have to split, the Supreme Court can't review everything. We created the Court of Appeals. I suspect, like that point in the 19th century when the Supreme Court suddenly realized that it couldn't handle everything in the growing, more complicated country, that there may be a mismatch between the FCC's workload and its present structure. Is going to the Ofcom structure the right solution? I don't know, but reviewing the resources available and the decision-making process that has trouble dealing with wireless innovation of the several different controversies that I mentioned, and the problems that Mr. Lazarus points out. I think it was docket 09157, the wireless innovation docket. Now I think of it. He had very insightful comments in there. I disagree with his solution, but the examples that he cites in his comments in there are quite telling that FCC can't deal efficiently with relatively simple, non-controversial things where the line's drawn in the sand here. I don't know how it's going to deal with this one. And I think it needs to reconsider some fundamental decision-making structures that it has.
Great. Well, you've answered all my questions. Was there anything else that the team wanted to ask?
I think so.
That was really,
great.
really helpful.
And come to my class at Virginia Tech and you can get academic credit.
Oh, you
Sure.
teach all the way out in
No,
Virginia?
it's in Falls Church.
Oh, nice.
If we had an invite, I certainly would go. I'd be
There are a couple more
happy.
lectures.
Let me know. I will.
It's Tuesday nights, at four to 6:45, although on the 19th it'll be at 3.
That's exactly when this class is.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
That's too bad.
Well, maybe I could do the telecast and taping of some sorts. But thank you very much for everything.
Yep. Now, I have a conference call because I naively signed on for a project involving Brits and Aussies, and it